The 302. Yeah, we got a lot to do. I want to get out here today.
I told Heather she can make us as short as she wants.
No, I said, listen, I'll go to Montreal.
No, we don't.
You have no money.
Yes, we do. We can move all out.
Are we live?
All right, the school board workshop for budget planning is now called to order. Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. So, budget workshop today. We are here in March. We want to cover two main concepts. First is a mid-year update on where we are in the current year budget. And then we want to start talking about some planning and some board direction as we move into preparing next year's budget. So I'll skip past the agenda, starting with the general fund mid-year. So the third FEFP calculation came out from DOE in late January. And this is where we true up from projection to what we actually saw occur in our schools during the first half of the year. So starting the year with our budget, it's all based on projections. And then when we do the count in October, we see what students actually showed up, and we are over 2,000 students under our projection this year. So we will get into the breakdown, but that translated into a $17.8 million reduction in our funding. Our average per student funding stayed the same at $8,322 per student. There was a provision put in by the legislature last year to make sure that that was maintained if it was potentially going to drop mid-year. So ours would have dropped a little, just slightly, and so that was maintained at the $83.22. Every time a new calculation comes out, we do look at our ranking amongst the 67 school districts, and so as of the latest, we are 66th. You guys know we're generally in that bottom 5 area. It bounces around a little bit.
I don't heard it all the time, but I never understood like why.
Talk about it a lot.
It's because of compression or whatever, but shouldn't that also apply to other people in our same?
Taxes we take on. Property taxes.
So it's a couple things, and yes, we have talked about it a lot and done a lot of analysis on it in the past. But one major part of it is our property taxes. So you have all the coastal areas, which are above average. So they bring in significantly more, which bumps their ranking up. Even though we're compressed, we're just compressed up to the average.
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of counties in the middle too.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other things, right?
So it's not just that.
It's actually, I mean, there's several components within the formula. Right. So it's multiple components within the FEFP formula where we fall lower than average, and so it's a compounding effect of multiple things. It's not just property values. It's also your small districts that get sparsity and minimum
they get extra
allocation
funding they're so underfunded
on
they can't.
a per student basis. That's going to bump them up because if there's a minimum allocation, when you divide it by the number of students, they're getting more per student.
Yeah.
So that bumps up so you have your coastal districts with high property values, you have your small districts with the minimum allocations. The other big area that we've identified is we think we're low in what we're collecting for ESE funding. We've talked about that over the years. I actually want to really thank Hillary DeLuca. She's done some good work in digging into the data. We didn't necessarily have enough visibility into it in the past to really tackle the issue, and I think we're starting to get there now. So it's a major area of opportunity.
We are. That has been a lot of the work that we've done this spring, is really trying to figure out, number one, are the matrices that our ESE students have, is it reflective of the services that we provide and that are in the IEP? The second thing is, are the students scheduled appropriately to ensure that they receive all of the proper funding? So those are things that we have had to go over with a fine-tooth comb, which quite honestly, this is really where we've put the most visibility because it is such a significant amount of money.
And we're just starting to really dig into that, so there's still a lot of opportunity
Yep.
in that area
Yeah,
as we move
because
forward.
earlier this morning, actually, went over to ESC because I had some extra time on my hands. I actually spoke to them. There's quite a few hospital bound or homebound. Sometimes we send a teacher 1-to-1 to somebody's house, and that sounds expensive. I mean, not that I want to do it, but it sounds expensive. Are we getting properly reimbursed for those services?
So, we don't have, we have what appears to be a lot of hospital homebound students, but in the grand scheme of the size of our district, we actually don't. So it's a very small nominal footprint into with ESE, what some of the things that we're starting to kind of unpack and look for greater efficiency.
All right,
But
I
to
didn't
your
want
point,
an answer right
but
away.
to your point, we
I
need
just
to make
wanted
sure
to
that
give you
they're
some out
coded
there.
properly. I'm hoping
Yeah.
that the hospital homebound ones are obvious and are being handled properly, but that's the whole point, is to make sure that we are coding the services that the students need to be provided and receiving adequate, at least appropriate funding for it. Now, we know ESC funding is not enough to cover the need in the first place,
No.
but at least within the structure that's been put in place for us to operate within, we want to make sure we're maximizing it.
I can guess too, though, with the rankings, I mean, it probably all falls within very small numbers of who's
The ones at the bottom
like,
too,
I'm
like
sure
between
it's
60 and
us
67 is pretty
jumping
close, so we all
between.
jump between.
Yeah.
But our Central Florida coalition districts are generally in the bottom because of those reasons. So once you carve out high property values and small districts, the central districts fall to the bottom.
So if anybody wants to build a beach anywhere,
They've got those lagoon things that
Yeah.
they do now. Polk County has
Lake
one,
Nona
I think.
South and South. Lake Nona South.
Yeah.
Or more commercial property. I mean, Neo City is helping. And then the last thing I had on that slide was just the amount that's coming out of our district funding for family empowerment. And I did want to point out that we recovered $2 million from last year's budget. That was the issue that had to do with students that had applied for family empowerment scholarships and were receiving scholarship voucher payments, but then ended up back in our schools during survey period. And so we were educating them in our schools, but they had received the family empowerment scholarship. So all that money went out the door. And DOE had to go through a very extensive process with the funding organizations to recover those dollars back. So this $2 million is what we've now received in January that applied to last school year.
So you're saying these students left and then came back, but they were not.
So they, and this is a generalization, but the
Sure.
issue was that they applied for a scholarship, received voucher payments. So there's 4 quarterly voucher payments throughout the year. So they received 1 or more of those. Then we recorded them as our student because they were present here during survey week. But because that voucher payment had already gone out, that money gets deducted out of our money.
Okay.
So they got recorded as our student if they were here and present, but the money had essentially already gone out the door and had to be recovered from the family or the scholarship funding organization before the cash ever came back into our hands.
Oh, so the student never physically left. They stayed here the whole time.
The student could have been here the whole time, or at least part of the time.
But definitely during FTE.
But
During
during
after
FTE,
we
we
is
had
that it's a cutoff. It's a certain
Right.
date we come in there. And
a week in
we take
October, a
account.
week in
Right.
February.
Because it can happen the other way around, kind of like what Ms. Castillo said, right? They could have decided to go to Family Empower Scholarship, then the first October survey, decided for whatever reason they didn't like it, they want to come back to the school district.
So
It
if
would
they
have been-
weren't here during count week, we wouldn't have gotten funding
Right.
anyway.
Well, I
But
see what
more likely what you're seeing is people are going down the scholarship route and then ending up back in our schools.
Okay.
Okay, so slide 5 just shows a breakdown of our FTE numbers between our regular traditional schools, charter, and family empowerment. So you can see the total change or under projection was the 2,100. Charter schools were up 700. Family empowerment didn't quite meet projection, but all the rest of that was kids in our traditional schools that we had planned for that didn't materialize. And it was the first year in a while, other than COVID, that Osceola was actually down, not just below projection, but down from the prior year in our traditional schools. So that's something we really need to be aware of. We hear that nationwide with and definitely statewide with the expansion of the scholarships, that, you know, districts that aren't growing as quickly as us are seeing kids go out to scholarship programs and their enrollment decline. With all the growth that's expected here in our county, we're still expecting more growth than kids that we're losing to scholarships, but we did actually see that problem occur this year because we just didn't meet projection in total anyway.
Now, did that impact any specific schools more than others? Because I know Rhonda said she'll try to do a capacity.
Yeah.
Schools
Is
with
anybody at a
declining
dangerous
enrollment.
low?
Don't we have that, where is that? I saw that recently. Is it on some attachment in the agenda?
I don't think
I saw
I
that
attached
recently.
to anything.
There was some listed during.
Yeah, and it has the,
The
oh,
over
it was
and-
during
Budget.
budget. Where was it?
It might have been during our rezoning, it was just for those schools though that had enrollment lists.
I saw
We always
bullets
put it in
and it
our
has-
regular budget.
Yeah, I
our
think
big
that's
budget
where-
book, we always put it by school.
Yeah,
But yeah, we don't have it in this presentation here. But we can do
We can
projections.
definitely provide it.
We can provide our projection sheet that we're currently using for allocation meetings. Yeah, we can get that out to the board members. All right. Moving on to slide 6. So this is the money piece of the impact of the 2,100 students under projection, translating into a $17.8 million reduction in our funding in the current year. Again, all of the numbers that come out of the state include family empowerment and charters. So once we back them out, we end up at $18.2 million funding reduction. So then the question becomes, what do we do? How do we cut our budget in the current year to absorb that loss? And we always hold back a certain amount of FTE. So the $5.9 million is a result of what we had held back initially. So students that we don't necessarily allocate out to schools, so that we're not allocating teachers at the start of the year and then having to pull them back. So that's the first $5.9 million. Then the day 20 allocation reductions, we were able to pull back a little over $5 million in teacher allocations that had originally been planned for the projected number of students. But then after school starts, we go through that process with each school and look at, based on the number of students that showed up, how many teachers do they really need, and start pulling those allocations back. So that $5 million is how much we were able to recover back in September once we went through that process. The school discretionary adjustments, we always make that change mid-year. Again, just to true up each individual school to the number of students that they really do have. Some go up, some go down, but the net amount was that $196,000 savings to the budget. And then the last part is the lapse or unspent salaries. And we know the last several years, due to our vacant positions, we have seen more in that area. We always budget our expectation for unspent salaries, but we have been seeing significantly more than that in recent years, and we never want to over budget that because it's not guaranteed. So our projection right now, we're at I think 5.8 million when we looked the other day. So we're projecting somewhere around 7.5. We think we'll hit by the end of the year. That was over and above what we had budgeted. So that will help us get through this year back to a break-even point without having to do any other significant cuts.
but that's this year, and I'm assuming that
That's this
we're expecting the same trend to continue.
Yes, we have talked about what we should be projecting for next year as far as unspent salaries, and we'll get into that a little bit more because I do want to talk more about that. So just sticking with where we think we're gonna end the current year, if you flip to slide 7, this is the long-range general fund balance forecast that was part of our original budget. So nothing's changed here. This is just a reminder of what our long-term plan was from a fund balance strategy perspective. So as a reminder, if you look down at the last line, the financial condition ratio, state average has been just over 10%. This is the number that we're required to be at least 3. We have a school board policy that requires a minimum of 6. I think our happy spot here has been between 8 and 10 in the past. If you look at 2021, which is the first year listed on this slide, you'll see the 11. That was the result of intentionally building up fund balance during COVID when all of the ESSER and ARP federal money started coming forward. So that was an intentional strategy. Prior to that, we were around the 8, 9, 10% range. So that was an intentional buildup with the plan that over the next 3 years, when we got to this ARP expiration date, which is now coming up next year, that we would then use some of that additional fund balance to help get us through the next year or two without having to just drastically cut everything all at once. So that's really the strategy that's represented here. And what our plan was, what the current board adopted budget is for the current year, was to dip into fund balance by $3 million and just below an 8% financial condition ratio. So given the slide we just discussed prior to this about kind of absorbing the funding loss, we're thinking we can still kind of land in that same place this year.
And I think it's important for us to also talk through really right-sizing some of the programs that we have floating around the district. We've kind of seen this bloating occur of different programs and different systems that have kind of come into play over the course of ESSER. And then really kind of taking a deep dive on whether or not there's a return on investment for these programs. What's worth keeping, what's worth getting rid of. And we've had to do that quite a bit. And that has been a painful process. And there have been a lot of vendors that have kind of come out of the woodwork demanding meetings with me because these are things that we're just not in a position to continue going with. We really only want to focus on materials that are moving the needle. And if they are not moving the needle, as nice as the sales rep may be, or as long as the relationship may be, if it's not moving the needle for our kids, it has no business with our check. So that has been a really tough process, but Sarah has kept us on the straight and narrow through this process. And the goal really is to get us to a point where we are objectively looking at the programs that we're using, the positions that we have allocated to ensure that we're utilizing people correctly and to their highest and best, and that people are moving the needle on achievement. That's what we need to do. We need to move the needle on achievement. So if we have low math scores somewhere, is the model that we're using or the way that we're utilizing a particular resource person, is that really working? And so it's really required some very, very tough conversations, but necessary conversations. And I think it's been tough. It's been a bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow, but it's been a necessary adjustment to this point of something that we've had to kind of make an adjustment on the teaching and learning side.
Thank you for that. And absolutely, I want to thank Dr. Shanoff and the whole team for understanding and being receptive to going through that process, because it is absolutely a major process of evaluating every program and every position, looking at return on investment and figuring out what makes sense for us to be spending our dollars on, and especially as we move forward. So we talk about it all the time. We want to make sure we're spending our money where it makes the most sense. But really sitting down and going through that process is a major undertaking.
I'm kind of shocked to hear what you guys are saying, because all of these words, what you just said,
I know,
have
you're
been
like,
voodoo
it
in
has
this
always
district.
been happening,
Has not always been happening.
but should have.
Should have. And it has been absolutely, completely broken down here. We've had people literally during those meetings give a million different reasons why we could not do exactly what you guys just described. So I'm not going to take like a victory lap or anything, but that is absolutely. I mean, first of all, this is only happening because we just lost billions and billions and billions of COVID money, right? That's
Well,
what's
and I was
going
going
on.
to say, not to interrupt you, but not to go backwards. I mean, to the point he made. I mean,
Well-
we were swimming in federal grant money, and there was a mentality of let's try things.
But we weren't when the
Right.
first year I was elected, and this practice, what you guys just said, was bad voodoo for years and years and years and years and years. You weren't even allowed to say it, right? Somebody would file an ethics complaint if you said that nobody was using the resources in an appropriate manner, et cetera, et cetera. So why would we not? And this is, I think everything is key. Everything comes full circle. Why would we not at this stage throw that to the internal auditing function and let them come up with a system to evaluate which vendors are complying with their contracts, which was again more voodoo, which vendors are having a return on investment in some kind of quantitative manner, right? And that's exactly what you would think that they would be doing. Who's actually showing up results?
Mr. Guerrero, I would take it to a step further. I don't think that needs to be a job of internal auditor. That's the job of assistant superintendents, why they're there. You know what I mean? It's like, that's what I mentioned before, and I think you guys remember, I was when I said that whenever we have board meetings where we renew contracts, we wanted to sit there and say, okay, what was the baseline? If we hired, like you said, for math, we don't show improvement, I don't need an internal auditor to do that. That's what I got staff for.
So we actually,
Having that already, isn't that part of when we
So-
do a renewal?
we actually,
It's not on there still.
we
It's not on
are,
any of the documentation.
so we have, and it's still, I think it's still up in my conference room.
We have
The
descriptions,
criteria,
not
the
hard to read.
criteria that we used when evaluating the programs, I think it's still up in my
I have a
conference
picture.
room. Yeah, you've got a picture. But yes, I mean, that's what we did. I mean, we had a whole matrix that we had to fill in with every program that was using dollars allocated by this district. And yes, REA had to come in with specific data for certain programs. Did we reconcile some of that with qualitative input from your assistant superintendents? Absolutely. Did the assistant superintendent say, you know what, you're right, that's got to go? Or, hey, look, let me tell you where that has been particularly effective, or with this particular group of students. So, you know, there may be some repurposing of certain programs. There may be some expansion of certain programs, but there's a lot more than anything, contraction of a plethora of programs that, you know, quite honestly, I've had to try to find my way out of certain sessions this past weekend to avoid certain vendors at a conference I was at that were looking for me. And the answer was, we're not using your stuff because we were not able to see any return on investment. And that really is what it comes down to. Eventually we have that conversation, and I did. And for us, it wasn't worth the money, and I'm sorry.
So I would like to see a synopsis of those conversations and the list of vendors that have not been able to provide the ROI that we would have expected. Because I think that's key for people to understand that there is a process, that's being reviewed.
Yeah.
I mean, we had essentially an ant train of lobbyists come here, and we were receiving everyone like princes. So, I mean, I think that this has really come full circle.
So and look, I mean, there were a lot of ahas. There were a lot of programs that I was like, well, I'm not sure if this is actually working, and sure enough, the ROI report comes back and says that it is. So there were a few things where I was proven wrong, and I got to tell you, I would love to say that I was the hammer. I was not the hammer. There's the hammer. There's the hammer. There's the hammer.
I was the instigator.
She was the instigator. But I'll tell you what, discussions get very spirited at 7:45 on a Monday night in my conference room when everybody's ready to go home, and we're trying to figure out whether or not something's worth keeping. And we'll sit on a program for 30 minutes and discuss it and look at all the data and come to a consensus on whether or not it's worth keeping.
What is the, what data points go into the ROI formula you're using?
Yeah, so typically what we're trying to do is we're trying to see whether or not there's a correlation between the targeted audience's achievement levels and whatever subject area that's meant to fix. Now, the concern sometimes is around whether or not it's been utilized appropriately. And so we are also looking at usage rates.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of data points that are triangulated and come into play, because if the usage rate is low, we want to know why. And it could have a lot to do with the program itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So-
where that conversational piece comes into play.
It does,
And having-
absolutely. So we are looking at 95% usage of targeted audience. And if it falls below 95% usage of targeted audience, it really can't continue. There's no reason why we're paying for licenses that go unused. It just doesn't make any sense if it's a program that is supposed to actually bring about positive results. So these are things that that we went through. We are happy to go ahead and provide you the before and after.
And here's the last thing, not to complicate matters too
Yeah.
much, because I just want to understand your thinking.
Yeah.
We're not going to try to get into the brain of the superintendent too much.
It's all right.
But how do you guys look at it? And this is the superintendent too, when school A has great performance, but B does not. C has great performance. So it's not universal across the board, because you talk about usage adoption.
Yeah.
Maybe one person, like I know one school, for instance, Avid, falls in love with Avid. Principal can't send them out there. They're Avid. The other one, I'm not so excited about Avid, but their adoption isn't there. So what happens when you have unequal adoption or unequal results?
Yeah, so that's another problem that we have to solve. What are the barriers to implementation at one school versus barriers to implementation at another school? Is it that we've got a training vacuum that exists? Do we have teachers that have been using it for 5 years at one school because they have no turnover, and teachers that are brand new utilizing the program because they turn over teachers every single year? Do they have new leadership in the building? How big is that target audience versus the target audience at this particular school? Does one student not utilizing the program over here significantly skew the data versus over here where you've got 150 kids utilizing the tool? So these are all factors that come into play, and this is where we do kind of lean into the qualitative data and say, so what's the issue with implementation at this particular site? We could either go to the assistant superintendent or their director, or we could also turn to the curriculum side of the house and ask them about the implementation. We would ask that coordinator. They would ask their district resource teachers, why hasn't that happened? Dr. Clayton spends her entire day meeting with her staff. She has a ridiculous amount of direct reports for a deputy superintendent, in my opinion. And so what ends up happening is a lot of her discussions with her direct reports are around those very same indicators that we've been trying to extract and then pull together to determine whether or not something's worth keeping. So that's how we have been able to really downsize. And Sarah was keeping the tally. She was saying, okay, well, if we don't do this, this cuts $200,000 out. Okay, well, we don't have any data to support that this thing works. So $200,000 back in. Oh, this does work? Okay, this is a big ticket item. Do we have another, and this does work, do we have another funding source that we can look at besides general operating dollars that we might be able to leverage to pay for this? And so we'll look for other funding sources for those things that are effective. But we're not going to keep something just for the sake of keeping it. We're going to, or if we've got something that can do it for free. Okay? So there are things that we cut out because there are other tools that we have in our toolkit that we can do the same thing for free. So those are the decisions that and kind of the hunt for resources that we've gone through. And a lot of deference and thanks has to be given to our school principals that they've received this messaging. I had to share with them this messaging at our last principals meeting. And I had to say, here's the reason why we've got to do this. And at the end of the day, you don't have to like it, but you have to understand that everybody is having to tighten their belts. And we have a lot of employees that and we're in a very competitive environment, and there's a lot of folks that we want to make sure we take care of. And our employees are important, and we want to make sure that we can still be very competitive among the other Central Florida districts and how we compensate those employees. Mm-hmm. So those are things that go into, factoring all of this out as well.
How are we going to find the money
right
to compensate our employees, given the fact that we know a lot of new money's not coming our way?
Correct, exactly. So all of that is part of it. We are not cutting anything that has worked for kids. We have only cut things that for us, and I'm not saying everywhere, like in all districts and for all children, but for us have not moved the needle on achievement. So that has been the process.
The only thing I'll add to that is that everything we're cutting is not because it's just flat out not working, but if it's not worth the investment in it.
Correct.
And as we continue to tighten the belt further and further and contract, we're only going to have to get tighter on that. So, this has been an initial round of where are we going to start.
We're not done.
As we do further ROI analysis on all of our programs, it's not just going to be something works or it doesn't work, but what is really worth that investment.
And we are not done. This is going to be a process that we kind of go through at specific intervals and iterations, simply because we need to make sure that it's not just the teaching and learning side that we're asking to kind of tighten the belt, but it's every place else in along the way as well. I mean, if something's not working, we need to look at something more efficient for us.
Absolutely. All right. Happy to hear that. Not happy to hear that hasn't been happening forever. I know.
It's ridiculous that an organization of this size is.
So we are where we are now. So now we move forward. All right. So we're good on fund balance strategy now. Moving into next year, I'll jump to slide 9 is just the budget timeline. Just a reminder, everything kind of starts with the FTE forecast, which was submitted to the state at the beginning of February. And that timeline has gotten pushed out a little bit in recent years, but that's where we are now. We had the early session this year, so we have our budget. Now we have some sense of the numbers that we're working with and what we can start planning for. We just addressed some of this, but again, thanks Dr. Shanoff for spearheading that conversation. What we had on here, we were going to talk about the staffing and curriculum program review process. So that's kind of what we just talked about, the process that we went through on all of the programs, specifically everything that has been funded the last couple of years out of the ESSER and ARC funding, and how we're looking at what to keep, what to do away with, and what we keep, where we're funding that out of moving forward. Also going back to staffing, we did the same process with the staffing that's been funded out of the ARC federal dollars. So we looked at what positions are we no longer gonna have moving into next year and what positions do need to remain, where they can be funded and how much of that additional cost is gonna have to move back into the general operating fund. Our department budget review process, we sat with each one of our cabinet members and their directors and went through a thorough review of all of their staffing, all of their line items, all of their discretionary budgets, and looked at everything that could essentially be cut there and what needs to be handled differently. We always look at vacancies, and so we start pulling back positions that have been vacant for a long time that we've kind of been able to live without on the department side. So we've done a lot of that. School allocation meetings are underway right now. So we've tweaked our models just slightly this year, but we are getting a lot tighter as we work through this process on each individual's school staffing moving into next year. And we will give you guys a summary once we finish that process.
Really focusing on need to have versus nice to have.
Yeah, do we, and we don't really get to that level that much, but since we are tightening, just kind of thinking about it more often, do we start with like a bare bones base allocation to each school, for instance? Like, we know there has to be a minimum, right?
We start with class, making sure we'll be in compliance with class size.
Right. Yeah, whatever that base is. I mean, whatever class size amendment is, and say, okay, each school needs at least one dean, one whatever, right? And do we make each school kind of like justify why they need something else? You know what I'm saying? Like, say, hey, our school has the hard of hearing, for instance. We need a couple extra allocations to that. My point is, do we start at the base zero, so to speak, whatever that base is, and then each school kind of justifies?
Yes.
Start with the basic model.
Yes, it's a zero based budget. Yes, that's exactly what it is. So we start at zero, and then depending on how many students are projected to go in, the programs the weighting of some of the programs that they have in the school, we model that out as well. And then we have specific cuts based on that FTE as to how many assistant principals are generated and those types of things. So, and yes, we have made some minor adjustments. We've made minor adjustments where we've had in positions where we've had significant numbers of vacancies. So places that we've been able to kind of operate and still be effective. So we've made some adjustments there, not significant adjustments, but there have been a few schools that have been affected with a position here, a position there.
And also looking at where we can use our title dollars more effectively. So if we don't need to fund some of the extra support positions out of the general fund because they can be funded out of title, we're making sure that we're effectively utilizing those dollars as well.
My personal viewpoint, I can't speak for the rest of the board. I understand that there's, you try to do more with less, especially like in a support position. The only way I would kind of disagree with you to a certain degree would be the actual teacher allocation itself. You know what I'm saying? Because if we're short teachers, also we got parapros moving up, I'd rather be short a couple of parapros. Because
we're not allocating short teacher positions.
We're not shorting teacher positions.
We are not shorting teacher positions.
But we are looking at the paraprofessional allocations. We are.
Right.
Because that's where we see a significant number of vacancies. So the idea is that we're trying to look where we already have vacancies to pull back. So then, number one, we're not impacting anybody who's already sitting in a position. That's the first thing. But then the other thing is that you do not want to disrupt that teacher-student dynamic in a classroom. We do not want to mess with that. So we don't tinker with the teacher allocations. We didn't do that at all.
Okay. Just as a general, like I said, I'm not there in the room with you. I mean, you could be doing that, but I just want to make sure that there's a place to save and there's a place not to save.
No, absolutely. So I'd rather have more people filling those teacher positions and not having those sit there vacant.
Gotcha. But I know what you're saying, but you know what I'm saying, it was important. Okay, gotcha.
But we will look at class size too, because obviously for our core classes, we want to make sure we've allocated enough teachers to meet class size. But we also need to look at our electives and make sure that we're not having a teacher teach 8 kids, where that's not appropriate, that we are filling those courses.
Right.
So we
But
do
that's
look,
what
we
that's
do
what we
look
talk about.
to make sure that
I don't want this meeting to go on too long, but that's what we talked about. They said there is 8 kids in an elective per period, right? That's what we talked about before. Can we have like the adjunct instructor thing? If it's an elective class that enough people want, instead of offering the class 5 times a day, hiring a part-time, adjunct teacher to come in there and teach 1 class per day and still offer that
Talking about
elective.
CTE specifically?
Yeah, kind of like
Do that with
CTE, or
right?
even like electives, Like, that's just a different way of thinking.
Yeah,
You know what I'm trying to say?
there's-
Like, 'cause if there's a special class on, I don't know, cell phone making, whatever, I'm making it up, whatever. But,
Yeah, so-
but there's 8 per 5 classes, but there's 40 students that want to do it. So now it could be broken down to 2.
Yeah, where
You know
that where that model hasn't worked out so well for us has been for math for college readiness. So we had that articulation agreement with Valencia where they would provide the teachers for math for college readiness, and they were only able to recruit I think 2 out of the 10 that we were going to place. So we didn't have to pay out. Obviously, we didn't pay Valencia for what we didn't get, and we were able to basically serve those classes with our own teams. But in that respect, the adjunct piece really didn't work. However, for CTE, it's a much better model for us moving forward. And as new industries may move in, we're hopeful to make that a more attractive option, especially with some of the demand around what's going on in the construction industry. Thanks, Dave. So we're really going to have to, work on staffing
Because
those up.
colleges got that down packed. I know it's not a traditional model for schools, but colleges got it down where like, hey, Terry's got a master's degree now. She may want to teach 1 or 2 classes at the college because it gives her flexibility to do something else.
Right.
We may be surprised to see how many people will be willing to teach 1 or 2 classes, make a little extra money, then go back to whatever they're doing.
Yeah, actually, why can't we have part-time teachers?
Yeah,
For
so
like math or,
they have to be certified.
so, okay, so then the issue isn't necessarily having the teachers, it's the fact that we don't have teachers that are qualified.
Correct.
Specifically,
So
okay.
you have to carry the certification in the area in which you teach. So a lot of the issue is that no prospective teacher who's only going to teach 1 or 2 classes. Financially, it doesn't make much sense for me to spend, $1,000 to go through all of the certification requirements.
So does it make sense for us to have that as an incentive for part-time teachers? If we pay for it? Can we pay for their certification?
So and then with what requirement that
Stay with us for
that they stay,
Yeah,
okay.
you can add requirements, I'm just saying if we
Just
have
talking
to
about-
cut,
I mean,
yeah, right.
it's certainly something that we could investigate. For us, it's a lot easier with FRS if they're either half-time or full-time. Having 1 or 2 sometimes I think could get a little complicated from the benefits perspective.
I mean, I think it's something worth looking into.
I mean, don't
'Cause then you don't
spend
have
a
to-
million
they're half.
years thinking about
I mean,
it,
to your
but-
point, if they're half, we could make them benefited.
Right, I think
Like
that
a
we,
one-off class would be a
right,
different
I
situation.
think that if we were to pilot that, CTE would be the best place to pilot it. Obviously, elementary is probably off the books completely on that one. But then looking at high school.
So my thought process with that is if we're looking at the projections, I've been here since 2018 and the trajectory for the divide between charters and other kinds of schools has widened, right? So we keep getting lower, traditional district-run schools, and they keep growing, which is in fact the point, right? That's what is wanted in the state. So
By parents?
it doesn't matter to this
Okay.
conversation. I'm just saying that is the mechanism behind it. So at some point we're gonna be half and half. So we're going to have to think about different ways to staff our schools because we're just not gonna have the budget to staff it the way that we have been. So it is a strategic conversation that we should start having. We have to, at this point, there's no traditional district schools that are, like, we're not growing. Thank you. Somebody said it over there. Maybe we're not growing, right? We're in fact diminishing. So there is a conversation that needs to be had about how we're going to strategically rethink how we do our budget, how we hire, because this is the reality.
Yeah, I think that, well, there's that, but then it's also, I mean, I've only been in schools that have been in and around other schools that are options for parents. It really comes down to, you know, make a better product, make a preferable product.
I understand.
And I understand what you're saying, that the systems and structures may appear to be skewed, okay? But at the end of the day, the only way to combat kind of your market share is to lead on customer experience, and that's where we probably need. That's where I think us getting very strategic about the programs that we use, and us being very deliberate about our outcomes. And you know, I've talked about graduation rates ad nauseum, that if you start moving graduation rates to really high levels, people will see that their kids could graduate from a school district of Osceola County School, and hey, look, that's where I want my kid to go. We've got to create a better, more preferable experience, and that's where I really think charters can really help us, because I actually think that it causes us to rethink how we go about creating a better experience.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying. However, respectfully, I've heard that since 2018, and the fact still stands that regardless of, we can literally have Jeff Bezos teaching a class on entrepreneurship, and it doesn't matter because there is a function. I mean, that's the truth. Look at the last legislative session, right? To assist other kinds of schools to be successful. I am not making a judgment, to be clear, about whether or not that is the correct thing to do for families.
Right.
I'm making a judgment of asking us to think about potentially having to have a lot less students choosing us regardless of what we do. That has to be part of the conversation.
It does.
So, Dr. Chanel, first of all, amen. All right. Second of all, I think that we need to make a clear distinction that the dictionary describes the word diminish and shrinking as two completely different words, right? Those have two different meanings. I would not say that the district, by being forced to be more efficient and more productive with less money, is diminishing. I would say its quality would be increasing as a result of that, right? If we're producing better results with less money, we would be a better school district, right? And you're 100% right. If you want to deal with the market share, then get better, right? And when you're the only game in town, it's easy, right? When you're not the only game in town, now all of a sudden, Osceola County Schools is being forced to react to the market forces at hand. And that's what's going on. So I think it's important to keep in mind also that it's parents that are the driver of school choice. That's why it polls at 85%. That's a non-political issue. We have school. Liberty is the perfect example. Liberty is a very difficult school to teach in, to learn in, to be in, right? So the whole point of all of these pressures, if we're good at what we do, would be to increase the level of product of Liberty as a high school. So, I think it's great. I think that we are several years behind. We got, and there's in the meeting on that dais, I remember saying, we just got hundreds of millions of dollars Are we not gonna create a change at this district with all that money? Instead, what we did was feed a whole bunch of lobbyists until they could barely walk out of the building or fit through the doors by getting all the contracts that you're talking about, instead of actually making wholesale change in our district to improve the result for kids. So everybody else saw this happen. Everybody else witnessed this happen. Everybody else knew that we were gonna get to this point because you knew for sure, right? The dollars were saying it. With the conversations were had on that day. So I think that this is a huge blessing. Thank you, Lord, for letting me be here to witness it. We are having to become a better school district now, and that is a positive thing. We should not be frowning over it. We should be taking advantage of it.
Yeah, I could see a little bit of both. That's true. You always want a better
There's no
product.
both. We're on the same
And-
page, to be clear.
Oh, I think we
There's
are.
no both.
I think we are.
Okay.
Oh, I
Yeah.
totally
Just
think
to
we
be
are.
clear, we're on the same page.
And to let you know,
Good.
the details matter on being a better product. Like what you said with customer service.
Yeah.
Again, when I was in the military, we had a little script by the phone. Every time somebody picked up the phone, how you doing, sir, ma'am? This is the second 116 for. There should be a welcoming environment.
Yeah.
Every time I visit a school, I shouldn't be a school board member. I should be able to walk in there and they say, "Hey, welcome, sir. How you doing, sir, ma'am? How may I help you?" It'll be 5 minutes in there. It's little
Totally.
things like that, you know. And that's what we said when we're building
Yeah.
new schools. We shouldn't build. We built a new school that the lobby feels like this. So if you got a parent that's angry and they get into small confined space, they're not going to feel happy. That's why we had to. That's why I stressed that prototype
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
open lobby. I mean, not
Yeah.
so much open, not for everyone to be open. I mean,
Right.
secure lobby,
Right.
but a little bit bigger. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because when you get one family in there, now you can fit 2 or 3 families.
Yeah, and
So-
we're using that to really inform how we make some changes.
But that was the reason
design.
for it, though. I wasn't
Yeah.
just complaining to complain.
Right.
But when
No,
you
I
talk
know.
about creating that environment where
You're
we're a
right.
better product, those details matter. It's
They
not just
do.
the big stuff. It's the little things
It's
that
the
we can
little
do right.
things that matter. You're exactly right. Totally agree.
All right.
Thank you, because you bring up a good point about as we move into strategic planning, that's part of what the conversation that we want to start having so that we can make sure we're aligning the budget with our priorities as we move forward with the new strategic plan. So over the next several months, that will transpire as we continue to build the budget and figure out where our priorities are really gonna lie.
Yeah, and I think that, especially starting next Tuesday, I think that's going to be very exciting because I actually see much greater alignment than maybe others see among our board members. I really believe that at the end of the day, where we want to see this district go in terms of having anchors, I think that the anchors are pretty united. It really becomes the strategies in determining what strategies and KPIs really define what those are. And what does transparency look like moving forward? And that's where I think that staff can get a lot of good direction. But what I'm seeing among the staff is really a commitment to kind of think differently about things. I mean, that's a lot of what we're doing with fourth option is, hey, look, we've gotten the same result doing the same thing. Give me something new. Like, what haven't we tried? This is not a bad time to take a risk, We haven't gotten what we wanted to this point, so let's not keep doing it. Let's go ahead and let's look at the root causes here again and figure out a different path. And I think that the goal here with the strategies that staff will bring back to you for your consideration, not just around finance, but around everything else, will really be, hey, look, which one of these kind of stand out as fourth options? Which one of these really stand out as something unique and different that can really kind of take the district to the next level, and will reflect, I think, a new way of work for our folks around the idea of accountability, changes in real time, transparency, and commitment to the kids.
All right.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
No, thank you.
I don't mean to pontificate. I apologize.
We-
This is a
I know,
budget
good
thing.
conversation.
We've needed that to be said for 3 years.
Yes, we need this conversation.
and nobody would.
Thank you, Ms. Castillo, for pointing that out. Slide 13 is just a breakdown by program number. We always put the detail in here for you guys, but no real trend here to speak about right now, other than the conversation about ESE matrices levels and going back to the importance of making sure we're collecting funding that we're entitled to for services being provided. Slide 14 is our FTE projection for next year, broken down by category. So this is, again, the process that we go through with the Florida Department of Education, running their projection models along with our team here locally, both the budget folks, and we work with Rhonda and the planning team to look at where we think our growth is going to be. So our projection is to increase our FTE by 4.82% next year. That does include the expansion of the scholarship program as well as expansion of charters. And we've held back the 487 FTE. So the budget concern is going to be if we don't meet that 592 increase in students, then we'll be looking at cuts mid-year again. So these are just the projected numbers right now. We'll obviously see where our growth lands. But that's what we'll start building the budget based off of. So when the conference report came out of session this year, statewide, they're projecting the $118,000 student growth. Overall, the increase in the base student allocation is 3.72% for everybody. The total funding per student average for the state is 2.75%. Ours is just under that. So initially, the proposal was 2.5%, and then there was a request and an adjustment that was granted to bump that up just slightly so that no individual district would get less than 2.5.
Okay. And we're still getting compression, right?
So the funding compression piece, that got rolled out last year, right? That got rolled in last year when they did the categorical collapse in the current year. So there is no more specific categorical for funding
I remember that. I
compression.
remember that conversation. Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And then small increases in mental health, the educational enrichment, which is old SAI, and Safe Schools, and the same increase and same rules apply again to the teacher salary increase allocation. Slide 16 is just our numbers. So the 3,730 FTE growth. Our increase in per student funding is at the 2.55%. Total funding increase of 48 million, and the increase in family empowerment is 15.3. So slide 17 is our first very, very, very initial high level attempt at kind of looking at the considerations for what's going to increase next year, how we're going to grow, and where we're going to need to spend additional dollars before we get down to what is actually going to be available unrestricted money. So after we take out, again, family empowerment and charters, the ART positions, after we went through the list of all of the positions that are currently being funded out of ART, just under $4.5 million is what is going to need to come back into the general fund for positions that we either always had or have added as a result of increasing computer techs for our one-to-one initiative. Our curriculum coordinators had been funded for the last couple of years out of there. So bringing those positions back into the general fund is just under $4.5 million.
Right, but we do have some additional kind of contraction that's going to occur around some of these positions as they become vacant. Not necessarily.
So you won't backfill them.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we've already started that process now. So if they're
That's
vacant
right.
now and we know they're going away,
Yeah.
Okay.
they're going away.
Okay.
But I would say that the big change with the ESSER funding cliff is the definitely the discontinuing of the supplemental school counselors at elementaries. That was a nice to have, but unfortunately not enough to say need to have. Then the instructional mentor program. Look, I believe very strongly in instructional mentors. I do. But I also believe in, if these are your best teachers, get them in front of kids. And so a half a day coaching other teachers is a nice to have. A half a day of them teaching kids that really need high quality instruction is a need to have. So
May I ask, so refresh my memory, the intention in this was specifically to address like new teacher turnover,
yeah,
right? Okay, so,
and some of those requirements as well.
okay.
So this is how we're adjusting this. So, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I didn't know where you were headed with your
No,
question.
I was
didn't
gonna
mean to
ask
cut
you what your
okay.
plan was
All right,
too.
okay.
Yes.
All right, sorry. So the plan is to essentially create a 7th period supplement for those folks. So it would be additional dollars as a supplement for instructional mentors that want to take on that additional responsibility. You may have some folks that just don't want to do it anymore, or they don't want to do it as a 7th period supplement. They would just rather have their normal planning. But they will receive a 7th period supplement, and during that planning time, they will then go ahead and support new teachers through either certification initiatives, side-by-side coaching, those types of things. It does then kind of place some responsibility back on your full-time resource staff to do a lot of the coaching of the teachers, which is kind of where they should be anyway. So, but this is actually recouping millions of dollars by restructuring this.
Okay.
But I also think we're going to see significant gains in student achievement, because if you've got the right people as your instructional mentors, then they should have that much more of an impact on student achievement when students are returned to them.
Thank you.
All right, and that's at the bottom of slide 17, that $800,000 for the instructional mentor supplement. That is to now fund these 7th period supplements, whereas we will no longer be funding those half-day positions. I won't talk through all of these, but I do want to point out the increased staffing needs as we open the 2 new K-8 schools and as we grow and need new teacher positions. The reason why we only have $1 million plugged in here versus the full cost of staffing 2 new school support models is we are contracting in other ways because we were overstaffed in certain areas this year, or over-allocated for our model this year. So that $1 million is really the net effect of adding and growing everything that we would otherwise need to be growing, reduced by what we've been able to pull back. And then slide 18, just talking through some other things. So I think we've talked enough about the funding cliff and the process that we've been going through there. Substitute costs, I did just want to point out, we are seeing our substitute costs increase substantially. I know we've talked a lot about it, and I know that that's not necessarily shocking given the fact that our fill rate is now much better. With the cost increase and the salary increase, that's inflated that as well. But we are spending more in that area this year than we had originally budgeted, so we are seeing some shifts go there. Again, funded out of vacancies. So our, Jose, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had budgeted $5 million this year, and we're thinking we're going to end up around 8 or so. And then in addition to that, we moved to Kelly Services, but we are also now hiring more of our own long-term subs in-house again. So about 2 million, or a little under 2 million there as well, right?
But it was built,
Okay.
that's built
That
into
was
that
built
8 million
Okay.
projection.
Again, we've talked a lot about the opportunities in ESE and looking at where we can get tighter on the staffing there. And what else? I think we've talked about most of this. I mentioned Title I strategy. I think there's some areas of opportunity there as well, to get a little bit more strategic about how we're using those dollars and make sure that we're not, anything that can be shifted out of the general fund that's truly supplemental, that we're using those dollars more strategically in line with their school improvement plans, and freeing up our available money. And then our capital transfers, we continue to budget the maximum, everything in the maintenance department is charged to the operations initially, and then we are legally allowed to shift capital dollars to cover that. We usually budget and plan for that, but if we don't need to do it at the end of the year, we don't always make those transfers. That, along with property insurance, we are allowed to charge to capital, portable rent, and a couple other things. So we'll continue our strategy there. And then the health trust fund, I think we are going to probably need to put a little bit more money in there going into next year. And we'll talk more about that in our strategy about plan design changes or not, and how much cost share we want with the employees. But just something to keep in mind there as we talk about where we think we're gonna end the year and where we're gonna want our dollars to go. Slide 19 is really just a little bit more detail on what we already talked about. So sustaining the technology support and the district curriculum coordinators, restructuring the mentor program, and just continuing those supplemental counselors. And then we put a few numbers in here for you about some of those other positions that are going to be sustained and where we're going to fund them from. So the 3.3 is what's actually going to remain in ARP, and actually we didn't talk about that. So the fact that the ARP grant expires in September 30th of this coming year, we will have some extra money to continue to spend after we close out this year, June 30th. So our plan right now is to take a couple $1 million worth of those curriculum contracts and pay them out of next year's budget to use up our ARP funding. So that'll save us that money in the general fund for one more year, knowing that will, those dollars, assuming these programs continue and nothing else gets cut, those dollars will have to return to be funded out of the general fund a year out. So starting to plan for that as well. And then the 1.8 is some of the programs that we've pulled back in that we are going to be able to fund out of other federal grants, and a little bit in the general fund. But as we mentioned, several programs we have identified to be discontinued. So 5.1, as of the latest, that is currently funded out of ARP, that will just go away. And next we have some stuff on capital projects, but before I move into that, any other thoughts or questions, considerations from the board as we continue to kind of work through building the operational budget? Not from me. You look like you're thinking hard over there. All good? All right. Just to talk a little bit about capital, I know we just had a facilities workshop and Dave keeps you guys pretty well updated, although he's spending all of our money over there. So just kind of laid this out by funding source. So our impact fee program, for context, we've been right around $85 million the last couple years, and that's our forecast again this year. You guys know what schools are currently in our 5-year plan. But as we look forward in the projections, our planning team's projections are showing that we're pretty much going to need like another K-8 every year And if you look at how much it costs for construction now, obviously with the revenue we're bringing in, we're not gonna have the funding to build the schools that are projected to be needed. So we continue to assess that all the time, and as we see what students are showing up, as we see what happens with charters and scholarships and everything, and other creative solutions for space, that's a continuous conversation. So we have not yet started, as we build next year's 5-year plan, we have not yet started to commit to what the next school will be in what time frame. That's kind of the next step of that piece is, what's the next school that gets added in and funded? As far as sales tax, what I really just wanted to talk about is the process that we go through, which we've always gone through, but Dave has really helped us kind of revamp our process along with Mr. Noble. When it comes to deferred maintenance, safety and security, technology with Pete, we are going through a pretty robust process of having everybody identify their needs, making sure that we have the best budget estimates for those needs that we can as we work through our priorities, and then taking into account what money do we actually have at our disposal over this time period, and how much of our sales tax dollars and our $1.5 million are we going to allocate to each one of those areas based on prioritization. So that's the process we've been going through. We will probably look at keeping most of our levels about stable. The safety and security, we've pretty much been able to fund the requests. I think that is a priority. I know fire alarms is going to become a big priority for next year, and we're looking at those budgets right now are probably going to need to increase. We had that conversation again last night. So we will update that and see, what else may need to kind of fall to the back burner, or what else is still really a burning priority as we move into next year's budget.
Can I ask why fire alarms? Is there like a cap on how long they're why is that a
Scott, can you
priority?
speak to that at all?
So some of the systems just become outdated at some point, so then it's just like anything, it's time for us to just replace them.
And I think those were on the request list last year, and they kind of got punted to
Right. So
to say they will be first priority next year.
Got it.
In the technology area, I think we've strived to fund the majority of Pete and his team's requests as far as the priorities. What's really going to start to hit us is another 3 or so years out. Time's flying now, right?
Yes.
And we've talked some about a leasing option. So I'm sure we'll be talking more about that option and bringing that to the board, so that we don't have a massive refresh hit us all in 1 year that has to be funded. So, but other than that, I think we're gonna be able to kind of fund the things that are priorities. So I feel comfortable in that area. Same thing with transportation. We look at what the requests are based on a certain bus replacement cycle that RB and his team feel comfortable with, along with allocating some of those dollars for our white fleet needs. And I think we're doing okay there as far as being able to fund our priorities. The area that's really going to start exploding is our deferred maintenance. As we see cost increases in those projects, that's where we're going to have to look at how much can we realistically fund and realistically get the work done in each given year. So that's really the big area where it's going to hit us that we don't have enough funding to meet all of our needs. Other than that, just always open to the board's input on any thoughts on priorities that maybe are not the direction we're currently going. But like I said, we're kind of staying with our same strategy for now, unless there's some direction to move differently. Again, just a reminder that we have a bond issue planned for probably early next year. We'll continue to look at the market, but for the Oxa and Reedy Creek comprehensive renovation specifically, we'll be looking at another sales tax bond issue. And then, all is kind of the same, sales tax, and slide 24, just listed a lot of the other things that are funded out of our other capital, our 1.5 mils. And that's all I've got, unless you guys have any other questions or thoughts. Not for me. Good. Thank you all. Looking forward to strategic planning.
This meeting
How
is adjourned.
exciting. Can we wear jeans?
I am, yeah.
Question is, can I wear jeans?
No, you can't.
Okay, never mind then.
But you can wear
I'm kidding.
sneakers.
I'll wear sneakers that day.
We can wear
Shirts you
little
got us.
polos that you got us.
Yes.
They're not polos,
Yes.
whatever they are.
The
I wore
quarter
mine
zip.
yesterday. I like
Yeah, the
I like
quarter
it.
zips.
Quarter zips. And we gotta outdo you with our